The story begins on a sunny morning when the routine of the Millionaire Heiress unfolds with all the refinement of someone born surrounded by luxury. The imported car takes her to the most expensive and fashionable gym in the city, a space lined with glass, marble, and state-of-the-art equipment. She enters wearing exclusive branded workout clothes, attracting glances not only for her sculptural beauty, but also for the aura of power that naturally emanates from her presence. Everyone knows her, everyone recognizes her surname, everyone comments on the fortune she inherited and the luxurious events in which her family appears. But behind the perfect body and the flawless smile, there is also a young woman who silently carries the crushing pressure of family expectations, who treat her not as a free woman, but as a symbol of status that must keep its reputation spotless. Meanwhile, in a discreet corner of the same gym, there he is, the young worker of humble origins, who divides his days between being a personal trainer for a few clients and, in the hours when he is not teaching, acting as a cleaner of the place to ensure extra income. His simple uniform and the towel over his shoulders reveal the harshness of the life he leads. Unlike the others, who go back to their comfortable homes after work, he goes straight to the modest house where he lives with his sick mother, whose treatment consumes every cent of his effort. His calloused hands carry more than gym weights. They carry the weight of responsibility, daily struggle, and a life marked by sacrifice. Fate, capricious as always, makes their worlds collide that day. After an exhausting workout, she drops her crystal water bottle on the gym floor. He, who was cleaning nearby, quickly bends down to pick it up before she even notices. Their eyes meet. For an instant, everything around seems to stop. She sees in him something beyond the simple uniform and the role he plays in the gym. A deep look, marked by dignity, effort, and a silent strength that does not need ostentation to impose itself. He, in turn, sees up close the almost unbelievable beauty of that woman who seems to belong to another universe, but who, in that moment, smiles at him with unexpected naturalness. The initial chemistry is subtle but powerful. He tries to look away, aware of his social position, while she insists on prolonging that contact, as if facing something rare in her life surrounded by superficialities. When she thanks him, her sweet voice breaks the formality of the environment, and behind that simple word, there is a silent acknowledgement that he was not invisible. For her, accustomed to interested flattery, that man who seems to want nothing in return already becomes intriguing. For him, used to being ignored, feeling noticed by someone like her is a shock that stirs his convictions. From then on, attention begins to grow. In the following days, every time she comes to train, her eyes instinctively search for him, and she always finds him, whether guiding a client with patience and technique or pushing a cleaning cart to ensure everything is impeccable. There is no direct dialogue beyond brief greetings, but their glances speak louder than words. She feels a strange admiration for the way he dedicates himself to work with discipline and humility, without complaining, without bowing to the arrogance of the other members. He, on the other hand, tries to contain the growing attraction, constantly reminding himself that he belongs to a world completely different from hers, where a single misstep could cost not only his job, but also the chance to guarantee his mother's care. On a rainy afternoon, the inevitable happens. A failure in the gym's sound system forces everyone to wait in the lobby for a few minutes until the problem is resolved. She, impatient, ends up sitting beside him, who was taking advantage of the moment to rest briefly. The silence between them is broken when she makes a light comment about the heavy rain outside. He responds simply but firmly, revealing a deep and serene voice that perfectly matches his presence. The quick dialogue turns into an exchange of smiles, and for the first time, she feels she is talking to someone who does not treat her as the millionaire heiress, but as an ordinary person. This improbable encounter is the initial spark that gives rise to a forbidden yet irresistible passion. In that instant, she discovers that her luxurious routine can be interrupted by something genuine, and he realizes that not all social boundaries are insurmountable. There are no promises yet, no plans, only the silent certainty that their destinies have just crossed in a definitive way. Her life was a spectacle of excess, a constant parade of luxury and power. The The mansion where she lived resembled a modern palace, with glass walls that reflected the sunlight, gardens impeccably maintained by staff, and sports cars lined up like trophies in the garage. Since childhood, she had grown up among parties, international trips, and exclusive invitations, as if the world were a playground built solely for her delight. Yet behind the rehearsed smiles at gala dinners and the perfect photos displayed in society magazines, there was the suffocating pressure of a family that saw her only as an investment, the perfect daughter who should maintain the legacy of the business, marry someone worthy, and never stain the family name with choices that were not previously calculated. He, on the other hand, lived in a simple neighborhood, in a small house that creaked at the slightest wind, but held stories and memories of a lifetime of battles. The roof leaked on rainy nights, and the furniture was old, donated by neighbors and distant relatives. The narrow living room served at once as a dining area, an improvised bedroom, and a resting place for his mother, who spent most of her time lying on a worn-out sofa. Her illness demanded expensive medication, constant medical visits, and an attention that consumed not only money, but also emotional energy. Still, he maintained a serene demeanor, believing that every extra hour of work, every drop of sweat, was a way of fighting for the life of the woman who had always done everything for him. While she frequented starred restaurants, where sophisticated dishes were decorated more with luxury than flavor, he prepared simple meals, often improvised with whatever remained in the fridge. While she wore imported clothes, he wore cleaning-stained uniforms and worn-out sneakers. The contrast between their two worlds was striking, and every detail seemed to serve as an invisible wall built to prevent them from even dreaming of approaching each other. But fate, relentless in its ironies, began to create moments in which these two universes collided. At the gym, when she trained with dedication, she would glance at him cleaning the machines without losing focus, as if each task were a silent way of proving to the world that dignity does not depend on status. While other employees often bowed before her, laughing at any comment to please, he remained firm, responding only when necessary, without flattery. This difference awakened in her a strange fascination. Finally, someone who did not treat her like an untouchable queen, but like an ordinary woman. For him, every time he saw her crossing the hall with her elegant bearing, there was a mixture of admiration and caution. It was impossible not to notice the almost unattainable beauty of that heiress, the expensive perfume that lingered in the air, the way everyone around fell silent in her presence. At the same time, he remembered the responsibilities he carried, the danger of being swept away by a feeling that, in practice, could destroy the fragile balance of his life. His heart told him to get closer, but his mind reminded him that she belonged to a world built of gold, while his was forged in the iron of daily struggle. This contrast became even more evident in the conversations they overheard in their respective environments. Among her friends, it was common to hear cruel comments about lower-class people, always treated as if they were invisible or disposable. Among his neighbors, the heiress and her family were seen as untouchable beings, representatives of a universe of privileges that would never look at people like them. Prejudice was not just a barrier between the two, it was an entire abyss sustained by generations of inequality. Even so, there was something inexplicable that drew them closer. She, with all the privileges she carried, felt a constant emptiness, a loneliness hidden behind luxurious dinners and expensive gifts. He, despite poverty, felt complete in the love he dedicated to his mother, in every small achievement won through effort. And it was in this contrast that a strange complementarity was born. She sought the authenticity he carried, and he saw in her the chance to be loved without having to prove anything beyond his essence. At that point in the story, they had not yet taken the decisive step, but they were already entangled in a silent game. Their worlds were different, their realities seemed impossible to reconcile, but life had already placed them on a collision course. What once was mere curiosity now turned into a desire to know each other beyond appearances, and that desire would be the spark capable of igniting a flame that no one would be able to extinguish. The approach between the two did not happen abruptly, but rather like a slow and silent dance, where each step was measured with caution, and every gesture carried more meaning than it seemed at first glance. She, accustomed to being courted in exaggerated ways by men who saw her only as a trophy or a ticket into the world of business, found herself drawn to his simplicity, to the absence of masks, to the way he faced each detail with seriousness. There was no trace in his eyes of interest in her fortune, no attempt to impress. On the contrary, there was a visible barrier, a silent pride that seemed to want to keep her away. And it was exactly that barrier that, instead of driving her away, ignited in her an even greater desire to cross it. The first step happened in an ordinary moment. After an intense workout, she asked for guidance on an exercise he was observing from a distance, ready to intervene if any student made a mistake. He approached professionally, without any attempt to be more intimate than the situation required, and patiently explained the correct position, demonstrating the movement with impressive precision. The firm way he held her shoulders to align her posture sent a shiver across her skin, and in that instant she realized that never before had a simple touch been so charged with intensity. He, in turn, felt her breathing quicken under his guidance, but quickly stepped back, resuming a formal tone and keeping his distance, as if that brief contact was too dangerous for them both. From that day on, small conversations began to emerge. At first, quick exchanges like "good morning" or "see you later." Then, discreet dialogues about workouts, health, and sports. But soon the tone shifted, and she began to ask more personal questions, though always lightly, as if disguising her curiosity. She asked if he worked too much, if he had family, if he had ever traveled. He answered with few words, always avoiding revealing too much. But each answer was a glimpse that made her even more intrigued. Little by little, she discovered his story. A man who had taken responsibility for his mother from an early age, who worked double shifts to pay the bills, and who, even exhausted, never complained about life. It was a silent strength she had never found in her social circle, where everyone sought shortcuts and no one seemed to know the true fight for survival. The intensity of this closeness became clear one late afternoon, when the gym was almost empty. He was still cleaning the last machines while she stretched alone in a corner. Realizing they were practically the only two in the space, she gathered courage and brought up the rain falling outside. Recalling the day they had first talked, he laughed discreetly, and in that shy smile she saw a different kind of beauty, something that could not be bought with money, but was born of sincerity. They stayed talking for a few minutes, and when she offered to wait with him until the rain stopped, something shifted. It was as if, in that instant, they both decided there was no longer a way to ignore the connection they felt. As the weeks went by, their bond deepened. She invented excuses to prolong her time at the gym, sometimes staying hours longer just to exchange a few words with him. He, though reluctant, began to notice that her presence brought lightness to his heavy days, that her smile had the power to erase, even for a moment, the constant worry about his mother's health. The differences between them were still stark, but when they were together, none of that mattered. It was as if, in those moments, the outside world disappeared, leaving only the truth they both carried in their hearts. This bond, built in silence and reinforced with every glance, could no longer be hidden. She longed to see him. He feared the day someone would notice their closeness, but both knew the feeling was growing, uncontrollable, and irresistible. There were still no open declarations, still no direct confessions, but the intensity already spoke for itself. It was a love born in secrecy, yet carrying within it the force of a storm about to break. The love that was born in secret did not take long to attract suspicious glances. After all, in an environment like that luxurious gym, where every member carried not only sculpted muscles but also important surnames and well-stocked bank accounts, nothing went unnoticed. Just a few lingering looks between the two, a few conversations at unusual times, and the first malicious comments began to circulate. It all started subtly, in muffled whispers in the hallways, in the contained laughter of a few women who thought they owned the place. "Look at that, the heiress giving attention to the gym cleaner. She must be bored," they said, as if it were impossible for her interest to be genuine. Others, more cruel, insinuated that he was trying to take advantage, that soon he would find a way to climb socially at her expense. Prejudice, disguised as jokes, spread like poison among the glass walls of that place that ironically marketed itself as a temple of health and well-being. but concealed the sickest judgments of society. She began to feel the difference in the way people looked at her. Before, she was seen as the untouchable woman, the unreachable goddess who reigned supreme. Now, some walked past her with ironic smiles, as if mocking her choice. The worst, however, was realizing that even people close to her, with whom she had shared years of friendship, began to distance themselves, fearing being associated with the rebellion of the heiress. For many, it was inconceivable that someone so rich, so beautiful, and so desired could be interested in a man who, in addition to being a personal trainer, also cleaned the floors they walked on. He, in turn, also began to bear the weight of this prejudice. Some clients started treating him with disdain, as if his competence had been diminished by his mere closeness to her. He heard low comments like, "Trying to climb the ladder, huh?" And even cruel jokes about him being just another pauper dreaming too high. His first reaction was to withdraw, to harden his heart and maintain professional posture, pretending not to hear, but inside, each word was like a sharp blade cutting into his dignity. He knew he had little to offer materially, but he had never accepted being reduced to the condition of an opportunist. His whole life had been marked by honest work, and now he was being judged for something he had not even done. The peak of this prejudice occurred one day when she, after her workout, walked beside him toward the exit. The mere fact that they were together in the same hallway made a group of young men laugh openly, one of them loudly saying, "The princess decided to play poor." The silence that followed was crushing. She, her blood boiling, turned her eyes toward the insolent ones. But before she could respond, he, with a firm look, simply guided her outside, ignoring the provocations. At that moment, she understood the strength within him. He did not need to lower himself to respond to insults, because his dignity spoke louder than any word. Even so, that same day, in the luxurious car that awaited her, she cried in silence. For the first time, she truly felt the wall of prejudice that separated them. It was taller than she had imagined, more cruel than she was prepared to face. He, in turn, returned home with a divided heart. He felt proud for not giving in to humiliation, but also carried the fear that the difference between them was too great to allow love to flourish. The first wave of prejudice had shown itself strongly, and both knew it would not be the last. It was only the beginning of a war against glances, words, and traditions that insisted they should never be together. But even wounded, they both realized something. The more they were attacked, the stronger their desire became to remain at each other's side. After the first signs of prejudice, what should have been only a fleeting enchantment became an internal battle for them both. She, the millionaire heiress accustomed to having everything within reach, now found herself torn between the weight of her family's expectations and the intensity of what she felt for that simple man. Reason screamed for her to step back, not to risk her reputation, not to give her family a reason to accuse her of staining the family name and the legacy of the business. But her heart, rebellious and untamed, beat with a force she had never felt before, craving his firm and sincere gaze, the discreet touch that still burned on her skin, and the presence that turned cold days into moments of true warmth. He too fought his own inner war. Proud of his dignity, he had always refused any kind of charity or pity, supporting his mother with the sweat of his labor. For him, life was a battlefield where every victory was earned at the cost of hard work. Falling in love with someone so far from his reality seemed like a mistake, almost a sin. Reason told him to walk away before it was too late, before he became the target of even greater humiliation, before the gap between their lives crushed any hope. Yet every time he remembered her smile or the sparkle in her eyes when she spoke to him, he felt incapable of renouncing that budding feeling. She tried to convince herself that this fascination was only a phase, a passing whim fueled by curiosity. However, on nights when she lay down in silk sheets, surrounded by luxury and silence, his image would not leave her mind. It was not just desire, it was admiration. It was the feeling of having found someone who wanted nothing more than to be himself, who did not pretend, who needed no masks. And that authenticity was what her life, surrounded by appearances, lacked the most. He, on the other hand, tried to protect himself by building walls of rationality. He repeated to himself that she deserved someone from her own world, someone capable of accompanying her to luxurious dinners and extravagant trips, someone who did not have to count every coin at the end of the month. But when he saw her eyes searching for him in the gym's hallways, he felt reason collapse. There was no logic capable of containing what was growing inside him, no fear that could extinguish the flame burning stronger and stronger. This conflict between heart and reason became evident at every encounter. There were days when he avoided her, keeping his distance and trying to ignore her presence. She, hurt by the apparent disdain, swore to herself she would not seek him out again. But a single glance exchange was enough to bring down all the barriers. It was as if they were destined to meet, as if the universe insisted on bringing them together despite all the differences and obstacles. Reason tried to impose rules, reminding them of prejudice, of social inequality, of family pressure. The heart, however, spoke louder, telling them that true love is not measured by bank accounts or surnames, but by the intensity with which two souls recognize each other. This inner war, painful and irresistible, marked the beginning of a passion that could no longer be contained. The silence filled with glances was no longer enough. That contained desire, that flame burning in their chests, was about to explode, and the moment of the first declaration arrived, like a storm that no one could stop. It was an ordinary night at the gym, but for them, everything felt different. She had trained beyond her usual routine, as if trying to prolong her stay just to be closer to him. He, in turn, was finishing his cleaning shift, exhausted as always, but unable not to notice how his heart raced each time he sensed her presence. When the last clients left and silence took over the space, she found the courage to approach. Her face was flushed from the workout, but her eyes shone in a way that made it clear that it was not just exercise that stirred her inside. He tried to disguise it, pretending to be focused on putting away equipment, but he could not hide the tension in his trembling hands. It was as if they both knew this was the decisive moment, the point of no return. She was the first to break the silence. Her voice came out steady but charged with emotion. "I know you try to keep your distance. I know you pretend nothing is happening, but I can't pretend anymore. I feel something for you, something I shouldn't feel, but I do. And it doesn't matter what they think. It doesn't matter what they say. I can't stop." Her heart seemed to explode with every word, as if she were tearing down the wall of prejudice and fear her family had built around her all her life. He, surprised, remained silent for a few seconds. The weight of her words seemed to crush his breath. Inside, a fierce battle raged, the urge to hold her right there, to confess how deeply he was also involved, against the fear that it was all a mistake that would cost too much. But her eyes, moist and filled with truth, destroyed whatever resistance remained. He took a deep breath and answered, his voice steady but laden with vulnerability. "You have no idea how much I try to resist too. I fight every day against this because I know who you are, I know where you come from, and I know who I am. But it doesn't matter. I feel it too. I feel it, and I can't deny it anymore." It was then that words turned into action. Without thinking, she stepped forward, and he could no longer contain the impulse. The kiss came intense, urgent, overwhelming, as if both had been keeping it locked inside for far too long. It was not just a gesture of desire, but a complete surrender, an acknowledgement that there was no turning back. The touch of their hands, the closeness of their bodies, their quickened breaths, everything screamed that they were finally where they were meant to be, together. When they pulled away, silence returned once more, but this time there were no doubts, no secrets. They looked at each other like those who share a silent pact, aware that from that moment on, they would be defying not only their own insecurities, but an entire world that wanted them apart. The first kiss was also the first true declaration of love, marked not only by words, but by the surrender neither of them could control any longer. At that moment, they realized what they felt was not a whim, not curiosity, not a passing adventure. It was love. A love born from the improbable, built in secrecy, and now sealed by the kiss that would change their lives forever. Their love, newly revealed in words and sealed with a passionate kiss, began to overflow beyond the walls of the gym. If before their passion lived hidden in exchanged glances and quick dialogues, now it grew stronger with every meeting, every gesture of complicity, every certainty that together they could face the world. Yet there was a fundamental part of his life that she still did not know: his mother. And it was impossible for that woman, so present in all his sacrifices, to remain outside of this love story. He had always been afraid to introduce his mother to someone, not out of shame, but out of fear. Fear that her fragile condition would be seen as a burden. Fear that the simplicity of his home would become a reason for judgment. Accustomed to facing difficulties alone, he had never imagined opening that space to anyone from the outside. But in the face of the intensity he felt for the heiress, he realized he could no longer hide. She had to know the root of his life, the reason why he worked so hard, the heart that justified his struggle. And so, on an afternoon marked by an orange sunset, he invited her to come to his home. She accepted without hesitation, even knowing she was about to step into a world completely different from her own. Upon arrival, reality struck her intensely. The small, humble house, the rusty gate, the simple yard with clothes hanging from improvised lines. Nothing resembled the luxurious settings in which she was used to living. Yet there was no disdain in her eyes. On the contrary, there was curiosity, respect, and a kind of enchantment with the home that carried the essence of his struggle and dignity. Once inside, she was greeted with a fragile yet warm smile. His mother, lying on a worn-out sofa, looked at her with tenderness. There was sweetness in her eyes, but also the wisdom of someone who had lived long enough to understand life in its harshest layers. With a soft voice, she thanked her for the visit, even without yet knowing the depth of what united the two. And in that instant, the millionaire heiress felt something she had never experienced in her family's ballrooms: a true home, warmed not by material wealth, but by the love that sustained those fragile walls. The conversation was simple, but full of meaning. His mother told stories about her son, about how he had become the responsible and hard-working man he was, revealing sacrifices and battles the heiress had never imagined. Each word made her fall even more in love, not only with him, but with the universe of courage that surrounded him. In his mother, she saw a reflection of what she had always sought but never found: someone who valued the essential, who did not measure people by their possessions, but by their truth. When night fell and the visit came to an end, his mother asked her son to accompany her to the door and, in a discreet gesture, held his hand and whispered, "She is different, but be careful. Her world is not easy, and I don't want to see you suffer." There was love and protection in that warning, but also a seed of hope. She had sensed that this young woman was not like the others. Her gaze, her kindness, her way of listening and respecting showed that there was sincerity in her feelings. For the heiress, that night was transformative. She returned to her mansion with teary eyes, reflecting on everything she had seen. The contrast between her luxurious home and that family's simplicity did not push her away. On the contrary, it brought her closer. She understood that love was not made of golden castles, but of homes warmed by affection. And she also realized that this man did not fight only for himself, but for a mother who had given everything for him. That made her decide, once and for all, that it would be worth facing any prejudice, any barrier, any pain, if it meant staying by his side. The bond between them had strengthened irreversibly. Now it was not just passion, it was love that had begun to take root in their lives, uniting worlds that everyone believed were impossible to reconcile. And his mother, even with her concerns, could already sense that she was witnessing a love that might change everything. The love blossoming between them could not remain hidden forever. And as in every story where the heart dares to defy conventions, the moment of discovery arrived, charged with tension and inevitability. Her family, accustomed to controlling her every step, had always surrounded her with suffocating vigilance and expectations. To them, the heiress was not just a daughter. She was the representation of an empire, a name to be preserved, an investment to be secured in advantageous alliances. It was unthinkable that the sole successor to a colossal fortune could become involved with someone outside the carefully curated social circle, much less with a simple gym cleaner. The first sign emerged during a family dinner, when one of the cousins, also a member of the same gym, commented with disdain, "I saw the princess talking a bit too much with an employee there. Looked almost intimate." The mocking tone was enough to set off the alarm. The father, a rigid man known for his firm voice that brooked no argument, shot his daughter a piercing glance, demanding explanations. She tried to brush it off with nervous laughter, but suspicion had already rooted itself like a growing shadow over the table. Days later, the truth came out in a cruel way. One of the heiress's false friends, driven by envy and the thrill of destruction, secretly took photos of her with the young man outside the gym. There was nothing scandalous, just exchanged glances, a complicit smile, the kind of closeness that only those in love can perceive. But to the family, those images were enough to trigger an explosion. Gathered in a luxurious living room, surrounded by works of art and oppressive silence, the parents confronted her. The father was the first to speak, his voice heavy with indignation. "Is it true? You're involved with that boy? A gym cleaner? Do you realize what this means for our name?" The mother, in tears, added dramatically, "We've always given you everything, and this is how you repay us? Throwing away the future we planned for you." She tried to explain, to show that it was something deeper, not just a whim. "You don't understand. He's not what you think. He's honest, hardworking, genuine, different from all those who only come near me for money. He doesn't want anything but to be himself, and that's what makes him so special." But her words sounded like blasphemy in the middle of that storm of prejudice. The father, unyielding, delivered his verdict like a sentence. "You will end this now. That boy is not part of our world. He never will be. If you insist, you will face the consequences." The threat was not merely emotional. She knew that if she defied her family, she could lose far more than privileges. There were companies, contracts, and even her public image at stake. For him, the impact was equally devastating. The news spread quickly through the same poisonous tongues that delighted in the scandal. The gym became a stage of whispers and accusatory glances. He was called a gold digger, an opportunist seeking to climb the social ladder through the heiress. Every word was a blow to his honor, and every look an attempt to crush the dignity he had always preserved. Despite the pain, her decision was clear. She would not be driven away by threats. She faced her parents head-on, with a firmness she had never shown before. "You can take everything from me. You can judge me, but you cannot stop me from feeling. I will not give him up." Her voice, laden with tears and courage, echoed like a cry of liberation from the golden cage she had always lived in. From that moment on, war was declared. The family would not rest until they were torn apart, and they knew it. But they also knew that the love binding them had already surpassed every limit. Now, it was no longer just passion. It was resistance. It was a fight. It was the beginning of a battle between the heart and the heavy chains of prejudice, where every choice would come at a price. The pressures from her family quickly turned into a crushing force, capable of suffocating even the purest of feelings. After the direct confrontation, the heiress found herself imprisoned within the luxurious walls of the mansion, watched at every step, deprived even of the freedom to leave without someone from her father's trust accompanying her. The family had decided that, in order to preserve the good name and avoid scandal, she should be kept away from any contact with the young man. It was a golden prison, adorned with luxury, but still a prison. On the other side, he faced a different hell. The malicious comments at the gym had become unbearable. Many clients looked at him with disdain, others laughed behind his back, and even colleagues treated him as if he were guilty of something. He tried to keep his composure, but inside he was torn apart. The greatest blow, however, was realizing that she had stopped showing up. Day after day he looked at the door, hoping to see her walk in, but all he found was emptiness. The silence was deafening, and each absence felt like a blade cutting through his chest. She, locked in her own home, cried silently every night. She replayed in her mind their first kiss, their conversations, the looks they shared, and wondered if she would have the strength to resist her family's impositions. She knew he must be suffering, that he probably felt abandoned, and the pain of not being able to explain the truth consumed her. It was as if they had torn from her the only part of her life that truly made sense. He, proud, decided to pull away. He did not want to chase someone who, as much as he loved, lived in a world of insurmountable barriers. He believed that if she was not coming to him, it was because she had given in to the pressure, because deep down she had chosen the easier path. It was a mistake, but one that hurt him deeply. He began working double shifts, drowning himself in exhausting tasks, as if he could bury the pain in his heart beneath sweat. Fate seemed to play cruelly. On a rainy night, he returned home drenched, carrying bags of medicine for his mother. At the same moment, she, on the other side of the city, sat by her bedroom window in her luxurious house, staring at the storm with her heart crushed by longing. Two worlds separated by wealth and poverty, yet united by the same pain, the absence of one another. The separation was an open wound that bled without ceasing. For him, there was only silence and the responsibility of caring for his mother. For her, there was only the solitude of a palace without a soul, where every object of luxury seemed to mock what truly mattered. They both knew that love still lived, beating strongly within them. But at that moment, it seemed that fate, cruel and relentless, had decided they were condemned to remain apart. It was in this emptiness that the flame of passion turned into suffering. And although both tried to move on, the heart would not obey. Each memory, each detail, each moment insisted on keeping them connected, as if an invisible thread bound them together despite the distance. They were separated, but the love had not ended. On the contrary, it was only waiting for the right moment to resurface, stronger than ever. Fate, which had so often been cruel, decided to intervene in an unexpected way. After weeks of silence and suffering, an unforeseen event brought the two of them back together. His mother, whose health had always been fragile, suffered a more severe crisis. The young man ran desperately to the public hospital, where he waited for hours in a cold corridor, sitting on an uncomfortable metal chair, his hands clutching a worn rosary he had kept since childhood. The fear of losing the only person who had always stood by his side weighed on him like an unbearable burden. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, at a gala organized by her family, the heiress stood motionless in a luxurious gown, surrounded by people laughing loudly and clinking crystal glasses. But her mind was not there. Since their separation, she had lived like a prisoner, smiling out of obligation, pretending to be the perfect daughter everyone expected. Yet that night, amidst the sound of the orchestra and the flash of cameras, an anonymous phone call reached her. Someone from the gym, moved by the situation, informed her that the young man's mother had been hospitalized. Her heart raced. Without thinking, she abandoned the party, ignoring the incredulous stares of the guests and her family's protests. She got into her car and drove straight to the hospital, guided only by the urgency of being by his side. When she arrived, the shock was inevitable. She saw him sitting, head bowed, his face marked by exhaustion and anguish. He did not notice her approach at first, but when he lifted his eyes and found her standing before him, it was as if time had stopped. The reunion was silent at first. She approached slowly, eyes filled with tears, and gently touched his hand. Surprised, he tried to pull away, still carrying the wounds of their separation. But the strength of their love was greater than any resentment. She whispered with a trembling voice, "I never abandoned you. They locked me away. They kept me from you. But I never stopped thinking about you." He looked at her intently, and for the first time in weeks, the ice that had hardened his heart began to melt. She stayed with him through the entire night, helping with the care, offering support, holding his hand during the hardest moments. Her presence not only comforted him, but also became a relief for his mother, who, though weak, managed a faint smile upon seeing her. It was as if, at that moment, life itself had granted not only that fragile woman lying in the hospital bed a second chance, but also the love the two of them shared. Her return was not only physical, it was the rebirth of a bond that had never truly disappeared. Through tears, silences, and lingering glances, they understood that nothing and no one could ever separate them. Not illness, not her family, not the vast social differences. In that humble hospital, with peeling walls and the smell of medicine in the air, a certainty was born. Their love was greater than any obstacle. When dawn broke, he, exhausted, rested his head on her shoulder, allowing himself, for the first time in a long while, to relax. She caressed his hair and whispered softly, "I won't leave again. "If I have to, I'll face the world, but I won't let you go anymore." These words sealed their reconciliation, transforming the pain of separation into fuel to fight even harder for their love. The unexpected return was not just a reunion. It was a silent cry against everything that had tried to keep them apart. From that moment on, they knew they would face even harsher consequences. But they also knew that together they could endure anything. After the reunion at the hospital, their love was no longer just a beautiful secret, but had transformed into something concrete, real, and deeply rooted. She had promised she would not leave again, and this time, her decision was not just a declaration of passion, but a conscious choice to become involved in every aspect of his life, including the most difficult ones. It was at this point that the wealthy heiress began to prove, through her actions, that her feelings went far beyond words. Their routine changed. Even under close watch by her family, she invented excuses to escape social obligations and spent more and more time at his side and with his mother. The modest house, which once seemed foreign to someone accustomed to luxury, became a refuge, a true home. She did not mind the simple furniture, the peeling walls, or the strong smell of medicine that filled the air. On the contrary, she felt alive there, as if she were finally experiencing the essence of what was truly important. One morning, when he returned home exhausted from the gym and found her preparing breakfast in the small kitchen, he was left speechless. She, who had been served by employees all her life, was now washing dishes, setting the table, and learning to cook simple recipes to help care for his mother. And she did all of this without complaint, without feeling out of place, with a smile that made his heart tremble. It was as if she was silently saying, "I don't want only the beautiful moments. I also want the difficult ones. I am here to stay." But her proof of love went even further. Without his knowledge, she began discreetly using part of her fortune to cover the costs of his mother's treatment. She did not hand him the money directly, so as not to wound his pride, but ensured that the medicine always arrived on time, that tests were paid for, that better consultations were scheduled. When he questioned how she managed such generous discounts at the pharmacy or hospital, she simply smiled and changed the subject, preferring to keep secret how much she was sacrificing her own freedom to help him. For her, it was not charity, nor obligation, it was love, and true love always requires giving. He began to notice that, contrary to his fears, she did not see his mother as a burden. On the contrary, she treated her with respect and affection, as if she were her own family. She talked with her, listened to her stories, laughed at her memories, and even helped her get up on the most difficult days. This attitude made his mother, once distrustful, begin to see the heiress in a new light. With discreet tears, she confided to her son, "She is not here out of whim. This young woman truly loves you." The heiress's proof of love was not only in beautiful words, but in daily gestures, in choices that defied her upbringing, in silent sacrifices that showed how willing she was to face everything in order to remain by his side. For a man who had spent his whole life fighting alone, this devotion was almost unbelievable. It was as if, for the first time, someone had decided to carry part of his burden without asking for anything in return. During that time, their love reached a depth that no prejudice could destroy. He realized that he was no longer alone, that beside him was a woman willing to leave behind the comfort of her world to embrace the truth of his. And she, in turn, understood that she had found not only love, but also a purpose, a feeling so strong that it gave her the courage to face her own family, society, and any obstacle that came their way. The world was still preparing to strike them again, but within that simple house, among medicine, laughter, and small meals, they had proven that love is not made only of declarations, but of gestures repeated day after day. And it was within that routine of sacrifice and devotion that the heiress demonstrated once and for all that her choice of him was true and unshakable. Their love could no longer be hidden. The proof of devotion she had given, immersing herself in his world and caring for his mother with humility, had transformed their bond into something so solid that nothing could erase it. But the world around them was not willing to accept such a union. When the first rumors reached high society, the attacks became crueler, more direct, and impossible to ignore. What once had been whispers in gym corridors and veiled jokes at dinner parties now turned into public remarks, open insults, and even headlines in society columns. Heiress falls in love with a gym cleaner, the magazines proclaimed, turning their pure love into a spectacle of humiliation. Each printed word struck like a blow, trying not only to diminish him, but also to strip her of her dignity. Her family, furious, tightened the noose. Tense meetings were held in secret, with lawyers and businessmen, as if the relationship were a problem to be erased, with the same coldness used to cut a contract. Her father, increasingly inflexible, declared aloud, "If she continues with this boy, she will not inherit a single cent. She will be disinherited and cast aside as if she had never existed." Yet not even threats made her retreat. On the contrary, it was in that moment she showed her greatest strength. She appeared in public by his side, unafraid of stares, without disguises, walking with her head held high. For many, it was a scandal. For others, it was a display of courage. But the fact remained. From that instant, the war was declared. There was no more middle ground. It was her and him against the world. The attacks came from every direction. False friends distanced themselves. Close acquaintances cut ties. Even her own family refused to welcome her into the house if he accompanied her. Invitations to events began to vanish, and cruel comments on social media tried to portray her as mad for lowering herself and him as a cheap opportunist. The cruelty of society revealed its most perverse face, exposing how deeply class prejudice was still rooted. He, who had always been discreet, felt torn between the pride of having by his side a woman willing to face everything for love and the weight of being the cause of so many battles. There were moments when he thought about giving up, letting go of his own happiness to spare her from public shame, but she, firm, always stopped him from taking that path. "Don't ask me to give you up. I gave up on living for too long, trapped in a world of appearances. Now that I've found the truth, I will not let go of your hand." That resistance only increased her family's fury. Her father began looking for ways to defame the young man, hiring people to investigate his life, trying to find any flaw that could be used against him. But there was nothing. His past was clean, marked only by sacrifice, honest work, and love for his mother. And that only heightened the rage of those who believed he had no right to stand beside the heiress. The conflicts reached their peak when, during a business dinner, she was humiliated in front of dozens of guests. Her father, with an ironic tone, announced loudly, "I present to you the future of our family, a boy who cleans the gym floor." Laughter echoed through the hall, but instead of shrinking, she rose from her chair and answered with firmness, "I would rather be with a man who cleans the floor with dignity than with all of you, who dirty the world with arrogance." The silence that followed was sepulchral, and in that moment, it became clear that she had chosen her side once and for all. The war against prejudice was not only social, it was emotional, spiritual, visceral. Each attack they received only served to strengthen the bond between them. They were no longer merely lovers trying to survive differences. They were warriors fighting for a love that defied every rule. And the more the world tried to destroy them, the more they discovered that they were destined to remain together, no matter the price. The war against prejudice had reached such an intensity that no matter how much they loved each other, the weight of the battles began to leave deep marks on both of them. He, especially, felt the burden of carrying on his shoulders not only his own dignity, but also her suffering. Every insult he heard, every look of contempt he noticed directed at the woman he loved, made him feel as if he were a mistake in her life, as if he were dragging her into an abyss she did not deserve. His heart ached more for what she endured because of him than for his own wounded pride. It was then, on a silent night, after yet another day of attacks and public humiliation, that he made a painful decision. He took her to the small square where they used to talk in secret during their first meetings, and with teary eyes, he said, "I can't let you suffer for my sake any longer. I'm not worthy of what you're facing. You deserve someone who can give you the world, not someone who can only offer you a humble roof and constant worries. I love you so much, but it's because I love you that I need to let you go." She froze at his words. The shock was so strong that her breath failed for an instant. Tears appeared uncontrollably. "You can't be serious. After everything we've faced, after every choice I made, you think I want someone from my world. I want you. Only you. It's not your possessions that bind me. It's who you are. It's your strength, your dignity, the love you give me without asking for anything in return. How can you think that pushing me away will protect me?" But he insisted. The pain in his voice revealed the battle he fought within himself. "I see how they look at you, how they talk about you. I know how much you've already lost for being with me. Friends, parties, respect, even your family. I don't want to be the reason you lose everything. I'd rather carry this pain alone than see you destroyed by my side." His trembling voice revealed the sacrifice. He didn't want to give her up, but he believed that letting her go was the only way to truly love her. It was at that moment that she showed all the strength that had always been hidden behind the image of the fragile heiress. She held his face with both hands, looked him in the eyes, and replied firmly, "You still don't understand. I never had anything, even surrounded by everything. My parties, my dresses, my cars, none of that gave me life. You gave me life. You gave me what money never bought. Truth. If I lose the whole world but have you, then I'll finally have everything. It's not you who's not worthy of me. It's the opposite. I'm the one who needs to prove I'm worthy of your love." He collapsed before the intensity of her words. For the first time in a long time, he allowed tears to flow freely, allowing himself to be vulnerable in her arms. And it was in that embrace that he understood that the true sacrifice was not giving up love, but fighting for it despite all difficulties. The pain, which until then seemed unbearable, transformed into renewed strength. The great sacrifice was not only his attempt to renounce her, it was also her choice to remain by his side, even knowing that the path would be filled with pain, renunciation, and confrontation. There, under the silver moon that lit up the small bench in the square, the two once again sealed the pact of love that could no longer be destroyed. No matter how much they tried to separate them, they were willing to give everything of themselves, even giving up their worlds, to stay together. In that instant, they both realized that true love does not require only words or declarations. It demands sacrifice, surrender, and the courage to face the impossible. And both were ready to pay that price. After so many tears, countless nights of uncertainty, and battles against an entire world, the moment came when their love transformed into both weapon and shield. The sacrifice he had tried to make by letting her go to protect her only strengthened the flame that bound them together. Now, there was no more room for doubt. If they had to fight against her family, against society's prejudice, against the venomous tongues of those who could not bear to see truth prevail, then they would fight, not as victims, but as warriors who had found in their hearts a reason stronger than any threat. The war with her family reached its peak when, at a crowded social gathering filled with businessmen, politicians, and journalists, the heiress was once again pressured to walk away. Her father, trying to protect the clan's reputation, decided to humiliate her publicly. In front of everyone, he declared, "My daughter must understand that lowering herself for a janitor is the greatest shame she could ever bring us." The entire hall fell into a heavy silence, broken only by muffled chuckles from those who delighted in the scandal. It was the perfect moment for her to remain silent, to lower her head and accept the imposition. But instead, she rose before them all, her voice firm and her eyes blazing with courage. Shame is not loving an honest man. Shame is judging people by their bank account and not by their heart. Shame is living for appearances while the soul rots. I will not be silenced. I will not give up. And if necessary, I will live without inheritance, without fortune, without the surname you all cling to. But I will never live without him, because he is the one who gives me life. And from this day forward, anyone who cannot accept that is the one who will lose me. Her words thundered through the hall. Some guests left in indignation, while others discreetly applauded, surprised by the rare courage shown by someone of her standing. Her father, enraged, could not hide his defeat. For the first time, his authority had been irreversibly challenged. Her mother wept, not out of shame anymore, but because she began to realize that her daughter spoke with a conviction impossible to ignore. And it was not only in that hall that their victory began to take shape. The people who had so often been crushed by the same elites that despised the young man saw in their story a symbol of resistance and hope. On the streets, whispers arose. She faced everything for love. What was once scandal now became admiration. Little by little, public opinion began to shift. The narrative of the opportunist and the reckless heiress lost strength before the undeniable truth. Their love was real, pure, and no one could deny it anymore. He, who until then had carried the weight of others' contempt, began to walk with his head held high. Not because society had granted him value, but because he now understood, with absolute certainty, that her love was his greatest victory. The dignity he had always carried was finally recognized, not through wealth or titles, but by the woman who chose to stand by his side when the entire world said she should not. The victory of love did not come with signed contracts or preserved inheritances. It came with their embrace amid the chaos, with the kiss shared before their judges, with the certainty that, united, no force could ever defeat them. Every tear shed, every humiliation endured, every attempt to separate them had become fuel for the flame that now burned freely, without fear, without shame. In the end, prejudice had lost. Her family, defeated by their own pride, could no longer prevent the truth from prevailing. The world, forced to witness, had to admit that their love, born between wealth and poverty, between luxury and simplicity, was greater than any social barrier. And at that moment, the two finally breathed in relief. They had won, not because they had been accepted, but because they never gave up on each other. The victory of love was carved not only into their destiny, but also into the hearts of all who had witnessed their struggle. The struggle had been arduous, marked by tears, humiliations, and trials that tested the endurance of both. But in the end, what remained was the victory of love. Time, which so often seemed like an enemy, now became an ally, healing wounds, dissolving prejudice, and shaping a new path for them. Her family, even against their will, had no choice but to accept. Her father, defeated by his daughter's firmness, could no longer find arguments capable of breaking the bond she and the young man had built. Her mother, once a prisoner of social conventions, wept in silence as she realized that her daughter's happiness was right before her eyes, even if it was in a scenario completely different from what she had once dreamed of. The wedding did not take place in a luxurious cathedral, nor in a grand hall filled with politicians and businessmen. It was celebrated simply in a modest space, decorated with flowers they had chosen themselves, illuminated by delicate lights that brought warmth to the atmosphere. There was no ostentation, no display, but there was love, and that love filled every corner of that place. For those who attended, the absence of high society figures did not matter. What mattered was the presence of true gazes, sincere smiles, and hands intertwined that would never let go again. She, radiant in a delicate dress, looked even more beautiful than at the glamorous events where she once shone. The difference was that this time she carried no weight of representing a name or sustaining an image. She carried only the lightness of being herself, a woman in love, free and fulfilled. He, in a simple yet impeccable suit, cried as he saw her walking toward him, remembering every battle they had fought to get there. He did not cry from pain, but from gratitude, for being loved against all odds, for seeing life give him the chance he had always believed to be impossible. His mother, sitting in the first row, emotional and proud, was the living witness of the transformation of that love. It was she who held their hands after the vows, and with a weak but faith-filled voice said, "Now you are one, and no one can separate what has been united by true love." Those words were like a sacred blessing, sealing the commitment they had already engraved in their hearts. The kiss after the vows was not just a symbolic gesture, but a silent cry of victory. It was the ultimate proof that love can indeed overcome barriers, that prejudice cannot withstand the strength of truth, and that even the highest walls can be torn down when two hearts unite. Around them, applause echoed, and tears streamed not only from their eyes, but from everyone present who witnessed that unique moment. After the ceremony, there was no expensive champagne or extravagant banquet. There was simple food, sincere music, and genuine laughter. Friends and neighbors celebrated joyfully, and even some members of her family, who had once opposed them, began to understand that happiness cannot be measured by social standards. Their love had transformed not only their own lives, but also the way many saw the world. That night, when they were finally alone, away from voices and gazes, they embraced in silence. There were no more fears, no more shadows, only the certainty that they were where they had always belonged, together. The future would still hold difficulties, as any shared life does, but nothing seemed capable of separating them anymore. They had resisted prejudice, faced rejection, and proven that true love does not bend before the impositions of the world. And so, the millionaire heiress and the humble worker lived their happy ending. Not the ending of fairy tales filled with castles and crowns, but a real ending built with sacrifice, courage, and surrender. An ending where luxury had no value, but love had everything. An ending that showed, indisputably, that when two hearts choose each other, no obstacle is strong enough to extinguish the light born from that choice.